Let's start with a joke. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson go on a camping trip. In the middle of the night, Holmes wakes up and nudges his faithful friend. "Watson, look up at the sky and tell me what you see." "I see millions of stars, Holmes," replies Watson. "And what do you deduce from that?" Watson ponders for a minute and thinks, well, astronomically it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Astrologically, I believe Saturn is in Leo. Of course, meteorologically, it looks like it's a beautiful night, which means we'll probably have a good day tomorrow. And of course, theologically, I see that God is all-powerful and that we are but a small and insignificant part of his universe. Why? What does it tell you, Holmes? "Watson, someone stole our tent." This is one of my favorite jokes. It's funny, but it's also a really good example of how jokes work. You've probably heard of jokes having a setup and a punchline. A setup does what it says on the tin. It sets you up. It presents a situation, but it also creates anticipation. If you know you're being told a joke, you're preparing yourself for the punchline. And of course, the punchline resolves that tension, often in an unexpected way. The disconnect between the expected and the actual is where the humor comes from. Kevin Smith's Dogma uses a series of narrative jokes to create the structure of the film. Narrative jokes work in a way similar to comedic jokes, in that they make you look back on information you already have in a new light. For example, in the Sherlock Holmes joke, it's established that there's this big open sky above the detectives, but the full context of that information isn't made clear until Holmes says the punchline. Now, a narrative punchline can be funny, although they don't have to be, but a narrative joke has the same setup and punchline that a comedic joke does, although instead of laughing at the punchline, usually the audience tends to go, "Oh, that explains it." Astute viewers may also be thinking about the famous example of Chekhov's gun. The playwright Anton Chekhov often made a point that if in the first act you have hung a pistol upon the wall, then in the following act it should be fired. While this is good writing advice, it's not an example of a narrative punchline. With Chekhov's gun, there's an expectation that the gun will go off, otherwise you wouldn't have shown it in the first place. With a narrative joke, the setup and punchline, the punchline is new information the audience receives that puts the old information into a new light. Sometimes we don't even recognize a narrative setup until we have the matching narrative punchline. So when I say Kevin Smith's Dogma is a joke, that's the mindset I'm approaching the film with. And Dogma isn't just one big joke, it's also a series of smaller narrative jokes that are being told along the way, guiding us towards that final narrative punchline. Dogma opens on a relatively peaceful scene of an old man standing on a boardwalk watching the sunset. Soon, he's beset by a trio of youthful miscreants who beat the shit out of him. What's going on here? Why are we seeing this? Well, that's the question, isn't it? When something leaves us in the audience scratching our heads, that might be an indicator that we're being set up for a narrative punchline down the road. So, we see this old dude getting beat up and we're wondering why. This is our first narrative setup, one of many. I'll make sure to point out when we hit narrative punchlines for this particular moment. Keep it in mind for later. Dogma has a pretty straightforward plot, but it tells it in an interesting way. When you boil it down to its roots, Dogma is about a woman who is sent to New Jersey to stop a couple of angels from entering a church and thus negating all existence.
Repeat that.
Stop a couple of angels from entering and thus negating all existence. I hate it when people need it spelled out for them.
But Dogma doesn't tell us what it's about at first. First, it shows us a few disparate groups. The angels, Bartleby and Loki, played by Ben Affleck and Matt Damon respectively. Bethany, played by Linda Fiorentino, who is important for reasons that become clear as the movie goes on. And Azrael, a demon, played by Jason Lee. Then it encourages us to ask what these groups have to do with each other. But before we get to any of them, we meet Cardinal Glick, played by George Carlin, who's introducing us to the Buddy Christ, part of the Catholicism WOW campaign. Bartleby and Loki's introduction is a great example of the tactic of using narrative jokes that the larger movie employs, where the information is given to the audience in a way that causes the audience to ask questions, the setup, before revealing the punchlines later. Let's break down the scene and see how it creates narrative setups and punchlines in a rapid-fire way. The story of Bartleby and Loki is the first of the three narrative threads that weave their way through this movie. We find them hanging out in an airport in Milwaukee. We first see Loki convincing a nun to give up religion, and Bartleby is watching couples be reunited at Gate 1. Setup 1. The audience is asking, who are these dudes? We know something is up because Bartleby mentions that Loki has been in the presence of God, which is setup number 2. When or why has this dude been in the presence of God? Astute viewers may also notice that Bartleby has two popcorn containers. He seems to be chewing popcorn up from one container and spitting it back out into the other, which is setup number 3. Why is this dude spitting out popcorn? Bartleby is here to tell Loki that he's got a plan for the two of them to go home, which is setup 4 and 5. Where is home, and why couldn't they go there before now? We cut back to the church, where a reporter explains that
Kickoff of a new campaign which seeks to bring Catholicism into the mainstream. With a papal sanction, the archway entrance of the century-old Jersey Shore house of worship will serve as a passageway of plenary indulgence, a little-known Catholic belief which offers all that passes through its arches a morally clean slate.
This is our 6th setup. What does this whole plenary indulgence thing have to do with these two dudes? Bartleby explains to Loki that the plenary indulgence is a loophole that they can exploit. If they can go through the doors, their sins will be forgiven, and then all they have to do is die.
Die? I don't want to die.
We then start getting our narrative punchlines all at once. Bartleby explains if they cut off their wings and transubstantiate to complete human form, then die with clean slates, they'll go to heaven. So we have some of our narrative punchlines right here. Number 1, who are these dudes? They're angels, which also clears up number 2. If Loki's an angel, then it's no surprise he's been in the presence of God. That, of course, means punchline for setup number 4 is that their home is heaven, and punchline number 6 is that the plenary indulgence loophole is what will allow them to get back into heaven. All this new information puts the conversation we've been watching into a whole new light, just like Sherlock saying the tent has been stolen. You'll notice we still don't have the punchline for setups 3, why is Bartleby spitting out his popcorn, and 5, why couldn't they get into heaven before now, but they're coming to us later in the movie. After all this, we get one last setup before the movie is on to a new scene. Loki asks,
Who sent the paper? Who cares who sent the paper?
Bartleby quickly dismisses the question. This moment, where an important question is raised only to be dismissed by another character, is actually an example of something Smith does throughout the movie. It's a nifty bit of misdirection. The audience is told that it doesn't matter, so that they miss that there's another narrative punchline being set up. As we see later, it's very important who sent them the paper. But the angels ignore the question, and so does the audience. After being introduced to the angels, we meet Bethany, whose story is the second of our 3 narrative threads. She's barely paying attention as her priest gives a sermon about a homeless man in New Jersey who the Catholic Church is working to keep from being removed from life support. The Catholic Church has strict rules about preserving life, so they are protesting any and all attempts to remove the man, dubbed John Doe Jersey, from being allowed to die. In the next few scenes, we learn that Bethany is Catholic, but works at an abortion clinic. She's also been struggling with her faith and isn't even sure God exists anymore. After meeting Bethany, we're introduced to the 3rd and final plot thread through Azrael and his story. Azrael is introduced at the home of a suburban woman, and while asking about the home's air conditioning, she is killed by one of the 3 skater punks from the beginning of the movie. It's revealed that Azrael and the skater punks are demons. This is, partially, the narrative punchline to our very first setup from the beginning of the film. We asked, what was up with those skaters kids beating up an old man? And the narrative punchline is, well, they're demons. Just as we get our punchline, there's also a new setup happening. Azrael explains that
the powers will attempt to contact the last scion. I need you 3 to shuffle her loose the mortal coil.
What's the last scion? Well, we'll have to wait for the punchline to find out. Bethany gets visited by the Metatron, played by Alan Rickman, who's the angel that acts as the voice of God because
Human beings have neither the oral nor the psychological capacity to withstand the awesome power of God's true voice. Were you to hear it, your mind would cave in and your heart would explode within your chest. We went through 5 Adams before we figured that one out.
The Metatron charges Bethany with a holy crusade and explains the backstory of the angels we met earlier. Bartleby and Loki were 2 angels who got mad and quit their jobs. As punishment, God banished them to Milwaukee for all time and decreed that angels could no longer eat or drink. So now we have the narrative punchline to those 2 lingering setups from earlier. Why couldn't the angels go home before now? Well, they'd been banished, and neither of them could ingest anything, hence all the spitting. Unfortunately, the angel bros have found a way back into heaven, which will prove God wrong and unmake all of existence, which is bad.
Existence, in all its form and splendor, functions solely on one principle. God is infallible. To prove him wrong would undo reality and everything that is. Up would become down, black would become white. Existence would become nothingness.
Bethany asks a very relevant question. Why doesn't God do something? And we get our answer just as quickly.
He could. But he'd rather see you take care of this one personally.
Why me?
Because of who you are.
And who am I?
Tuck early in that PJs. Don't ask so many questions. Just serve your purpose.
Once again, we have Kevin Smith pulling some narrative misdirection, just like he did when Loki asked who sent the newspaper. It's very important who Bethany is, but we're given a joke punchline instead of the narrative one that will come later. Metatron tells Bethany that she will have help in the form of 2 prophets, and that one of them will make mention of himself as a prophet. The next night, Bethany gets accosted by Azrael's demonic teen trio, and rescued by Jay and Silent Bob, played, as always, by Jason Mewes and Kevin Smith himself. Bethany quickly dismisses them, but changes her mind when Jay says they should go back to Jersey to sell weed, where he can make myself a prophet.
Prophets. 2 of them.
So these are the 2 prophets Metatron mentioned, but they aren't what we expected. Bethany asks the guys to take her to New Jersey, but Jay just wants to get laid. They agree, but on only one condition.
All right, well, let's say we're caught in a situation where we have like 5 minutes left to live. Like, I don't know, a bomb or something's gonna go off. Would you fuck us then?
In that highly unlikely situation? Yeah, sure.
This is actually the first instance of Jay's prophetic ability, as it turns out the world will be on the brink of non-existence by the end of the movie. Multiple times in the movie, Jay will say something that comes true later, and while he isn't knowingly speaking the truth, his voice is divinely inspired. The most straightforward example of this happens when Rufus, the 13th Apostle, joins their God Gang, played by Chris Rock.
Guys, I guess just don't follow the fucking sky, you know?
Rufus has decided to help Bethany on her crusade in exchange for her help in fixing some mistakes in the Bible, primarily the misconception that Jesus was white. We cut to the 3 demonic youths being scolded by Azrael for being unable to kill Bethany. He decides to summon the Golgothan. What's the Golgothan? It's probably a setup. Jay and Bob wander off to a strip club, and there Rufus recognizes Serendipity, a muse played by Selma Hayek. Rufus mentions to Serendipity that Bethany is the last scion. Bethany asks the same question we, the audience, asked earlier. What does that mean? Rufus quickly changes the subject, and the question is dropped for now. This is now the 3rd instance of Kevin Smith misdirecting us by having a character ask an important question, only to have it be dismissed by a different character. Serendipity also broaches the subject of God being a woman. This is somewhat revolutionary to Bethany, but she quickly adopts the practice of referring to God by female pronouns for the rest of the movie. This is a more subtle setup, and it's a setup for what some consider to be the biggest narrative punchline of the movie. We'll talk about it more when we get to that punchline. Their conversation is cut short by the appearance of the previously mentioned Golgothan, which means we have our punchline from earlier. Who or what is the Golgothan? Turns out to be
A shit demon!
There's a fight, and Silent Bob knocks the demon out with some air freshener.
Why would you ever carry this? Oh.
What?
And after the fight, Serendipity recommends taking the princess and getting out of town. The God Gang hops on a train to New Jersey, where Bethany and Jay and Silent Bob meet the angels, but neither group knows who the other one is. While not following our standard setup punchline format, this scene on the train is actually a great example of dramatic irony. Like Chekhov's gun, dramatic irony is a narrative device that many people are familiar with. We, the audience, knows what's going on, which gives added weight to the conversation for us. Dramatic irony is almost the inverse of these narrative jokes that I've been talking about. Instead of the audience being in the dark, waiting for the information to fill in the gaps, the audience has all the information while the characters are underinformed. It's interesting that here, at what is basically the halfway point of the movie, we get this moment of respite. Most of the narrative setups have been set up, and the majority of the narrative punchlines are still ahead. This is a pivot moment for the film, with both narrative halves in the balance. For this brief moment, we, the audience, have more information than anyone in the movie. The characters finally learn what's going on when Rufus wakes up from his nap to find everyone conversing. A fight ensues, and the 2 parties take their own paths from there on. After that tussle, Bethany is ready to quit, and she finally makes Rufus tell her why she was chosen for this mission. Rufus starts his explanation with a story. He explains that Jesus has numerous siblings, also left out of the Bible, which means there are people who are descended from Jesus' family, and Bethany is the last one, making her...
You are the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandniece of Jesus Christ.
So we finally have our answer to the audience's question. What is the last scion? What's the last descendant of Jesus' family? So we have a narrative punchline for one of those misdirections that Kevin Smith set up earlier. Bethany asked what it means that she was the last scion, and now we know. Bethany rejects the call and runs into the woods. She's met by the Metatron, who explains that her being the last scion wasn't the only reason she was tapped for this quest. He transports everyone to a fancy restaurant and explains that God is missing in action. The Metatron and Rufus explain that God likes to take trips to Earth in human form once a month to play skee-ball. On the most recent one of these sabbaticals, he was taken, and something or someone is keeping him from returning. Heaven knows that God hasn't been killed in his human form, because if he had, he would have immediately returned to heaven. Let's stick a pin in that for now. We do get another narrative punchline in this scene. Bethany is asked in the Mexican restaurant,
If this is so major, why are you talking to me? Why doesn't God do something about it?
and we finally get our answer, because God's not available right now. Jay suggests that they ask Cardinal Glick to just cancel the ceremony, thus keeping the angels from being able to fulfill their plan. Glick doesn't believe them, but Silent Bob manages to steal one of the Cardinal's golf clubs as a small act of reparation. Out of options, the God Gang retires to a bar where they are detained by Azrael, who reveals his plan. Azrael wants to unmake existence because, well, hell is bad. So he sent the information about the plenary indulgence loophole to the angels and has been secretly helping them get to the church. Remember when I said it was important who sent the information to the angels? Here's the narrative punchline to that moment of misdirection. The angels would have been a lot more suspicious if they knew their plan was set in motion by a demon. The angels arrive at the church, and Bartleby, angry at how poorly they've been treated by God, decides to go on a killing spree. After all, once they go through the doors, they can have their sins forgiven and get away with it. Serendipity tries to inspire Silent Bob to hit Azrael with the club, but Azrael finds out. He laughs off the suggestion because
I'm a fucking demon.
And a golf club isn't going to do anything to him. He even offers Bob the chance to take a swing. Bob does, and surprisingly, the golf club collapses his chest. So this looks like a punchline at first, and it's meant to make us laugh. But narratively, it's actually a setup. Why did the club work? Well, Cardinal Glick blessed them, making them a holy weapon, which will always win against evil. Having defeated Azrael, Bethany and the gang arrive at the church. Things seem hopeless as the angels have massacred everyone there, and Loki is already transubstantiated into a mortal. The only good news is they haven't entered the church yet. Bartleby monologues about how they're waiting for the cops to show up so they can come out of the church just in time to be killed. Loki doesn't like the plan anymore, and Bartleby kills him to keep him from interfering. Now this is the climax of the movie, so we're going to get a bunch of punchlines all at once. First, we get two more examples of Jay accidentally being a prophet. He earlier predicted the world might end, so now that it looks like it will, he starts taking off his pants so he can have sex with Bethany. Bethany is incredulous at just how horny Jay is, but he tries to convince her by saying they can be comatose like John Doe Jersey, or make with the love. This mention of John Doe Jersey is Jay's second accidental prophecy of the scene, after the thing about the world ending. Bethany is inspired by Jay's words, and she realizes that John Doe Jersey is actually God, and that by allowing him to die, he can fix this whole mess. She tells Jay to stall the angels for as long as possible while she runs to a nearby hospital with Silent Bob. Seconds before Bartleby enters the church, Bethany manages to unplug the machines, keeping John Doe alive. God, having been killed and thus freed by Bethany, steps out of the church looking a lot like Alanis Morissette, along with the Metatron. God speaks to Bartleby, and true to the Metatron's words, his head exploded and his chest caved in. God then cleans everything up, undoing the carnage that the angels had wrought, and everything ends happily. After all, she's God, so of course it does. I want to pause here and talk about Alanis Morissette. When the movie first came out, Morissette's appearance at the end of the movie was treated by a punchline by many. And while it is a narrative punchline in the sense that it follows the setup of Serendipity talking about God being a woman to Bethany earlier, that narrative setup and narrative punchline only exists to further reinforce the idea that Catholicism is getting so much wrong as to even misgender their own deity. Of course, God isn't really a man or a woman, as clarified by Rufus.
She's not really a woman. She's not really anything.
She's something, all right.
But that doesn't make the church any less wrong. But there's a deeper and more complex narrative punchline that the movie has already delivered before Alanis ever shows up. Kevin Smith is using the structure of his movie to critique the overly rigid Catholic Church in a complex but straightforward narrative joke. The joke got two parts, a setup and a punchline. The setup. 3 demonic teenagers beat up a kindly old man. The punchline? That kindly old man was actually God visiting Earth in human form, but because he wasn't quite dead, the Catholic Church stepped in to keep him on life support, keeping God from getting back into heaven. Meanwhile, 2 angels were attempting to use a different bit of dogma that would allow them to get back into heaven against God's command. By negating the infallibility of God, all existence would be unmade. So Catholic dogma is so convoluted and restrictive that it could actually be responsible for the destruction of all reality. It's funnier when Kevin Smith tells it.
Leave it to the Catholics to destroy existence.
After all, the writer or director of a film can often be considered the god of the production. And what else would you expect from a god like Kevin Smith? A 2-hour-long joke with a heaven of a punchline.
Didn't I tell you she was funny?
Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe. Do those things you're supposed to do at the end of one of these videos. Share it with your friends. Heck, even use it as an excuse to watch Dogma again. I do also want to thank Dr. Amy Gunther for her invaluable help in the editing of the script for this video. She makes me sound even smarter than I already am.
I hope you're the skee-ball type.